I would like, if I may, to take you on a strange journey.
Greetings, welcome to the Cultworthy. I've got a very special guest returning to the show. I've got the Professor Caesar of the RAD Revival House, a podcast that I'm a huge fan of, and I was already a fan of your writings and your blogs back when X used to be Twitter, back in the good old days where everyone was in there, everyone was playing in the cult film, vintage film world, and a bunch of us have left for many reasons. But that's fine because now you are doing your podcast, which is, on its second year now?
That's right, second season.
I've been given the honor and pleasure of being a guest on both seasons, several appearances. We just did Exterminating Angel on your show about a month ago. I had never seen it. It was a huge checklist to get off of it's a huge item to get off my checklist. And I can't thank you enough for bringing me onto that show. And today's episode is really kind of in tribute to you. You know, so I have these lists of episodes I've been wanting to knock off the list for the longest time. And I added one maybe like 6 or 7 months ago that was really something that you had been doing on Twitter for the longest time. And that was Premake a Movie, where you essentially retrocasted a film that was either already made or, let's say, was going to be made in the future, but you did it with retro actors, retro directors. So, for example, you do like The Good and the Bad and the Ugly, Premake a Movie. You love doing the spaghetti westerns. You did it with horror films. You did it with like gangster films and giallos. And so I put that on my list of I've never seen him do it on his show. So maybe I'll do it on mine and he can be the guest, which is exactly what we're doing today. So before we get into that, let's get a chance to kind of retouch of what the RAD Revival House is doing and where it's going.
Well, Antonio, as always, thanks for having me on the Cultworthy podcast. I'm a huge fan of your show as well. And right now, we are going to be at the 30th episode of Season 2. And I always have every seasons to be 40 episodes, so there's about 10 more left on this season. And then I'm going to put it on hiatus for a bit, just for the season, before I move on to another podcast idea of mine, which I want to keep under wraps, at least for now, until I have it fully under control.
Right.
And coming up pretty soon for the next episode, as of this recording anyway, it will be a retrospective on The Last Boy Scout, because I'm a big fan of that movie, even though it is wildly uneven in terms of tone and story. But I think it's worthy of discussing on the RAD Revival House. And the RAD Revival House, for your listeners who haven't encountered it yet, it is an educational podcast to unearth cool, forgotten movies for the young and cinematically curious. And I've built it especially for aspiring filmmakers of the younger set to discover films that they may not have heard of or seen yet, to give them inspiration for their own products.
Right. And that's where you and I really kind of fell into play, because I pretty much do the same thing over here, but I do it more of an appreciation aspect, where you do it as an educational one. And when our powers combine, right, it just really makes for some great content and bringing some great films back into the limelight. So
Damn right.
Today was actually a surprise, because I gave you a choice of which film did you want to pre-make, because you had so many great ones when you were doing it on Twitter. And I was really thinking you're going to go really deep into the bowels of cult cinema or retro cinema or exploitation. And you surprised me and picked a rather, I guess in modern terms, accessible and well-known intellectual property and film. But if you think about it from the time point that we're choosing to pre-make this movie, it really wasn't that. We're talking about Casino Royale. And we're setting it in 1985, 1986-ish. We're bringing Timothy Dalton into the Bond role, stepping out of that kind of cheesy, whimsical Roger Moore era, which people have love for. Personally, I don't. There's a few Roger Moores that I think are a lot of fun, but for the most part, by the time he was doing View to a Kill, he was like pretty leathery, right? We were kind of done with Roger Moore.
Long in the tooth. Oh yeah.
Long in the tooth. And so the only real Casino Royale that the public knew about was the real kind of goofy satirical one that had Peter Sellers and David Niven and that crazy cast. It was a comedy, right? You couldn't even put it on par with the other James Bond films. Essentially, everyone's James Bond in that movie. So thinking about Casino Royale in today's parlance, everyone knows that it was the first introduction to Daniel Craig as James Bond, directed by Martin Campbell, who did GoldenEye. Great movie, right? But I agree. I think that this really missed an opportunity in the 80s to like be taken again as a serious Bond film. So why did you choose this one to be the introduction to the Timothy Dalton era?
Well, I am a massive Timothy Dalton fan. I recall watching the Rocketeer. That was the first movie I ever discovered him, and he was fantastic in that. I was 8 years old. I saw that in the theaters. Even then, I thought, wow, what a badass. He's so cool. He totally stole the show from that movie from the star, Bill Campbell, as the titular Rocketeer, who was
I'd
cool.
agree.
But Timothy Dalton was amazing in that. So at that young age, I decided to explore more of his work. And at that point, I was already a James Bond fan. The first Bond film I saw in its entirety was You Only Live Twice, and I thought, oh, very cool. Like a spy story. At a time, I was really getting into it. Then I discovered Timothy Dalton was James Bond, and I saw The Living Daylights, and I thought, wow, this is absolutely awesome. But then, as time went by, am gathering more and more of my flux for the James Bond franchise, and Pierce Brosnan's on the scene. Cool, he's very cool too. GoldenEye is amazing. However, it started to become more and more stagnant as the years go by, and as more of the of his films are coming through. And then Brosnan is essentially let go from the role. And 2006 rolls around, and it's Casino Royale. I fall in love with the franchise yet again because Daniel Craig does a stellar job as Bond, as well as the overall production of it. Neil Purvis does a great job writing the screenplay. They essentially roar James Bond back to life. And then when I was watching Daniel Craig, I couldn't help but feel he took some inspiration from Timothy Dalton. He must have, because he has this angry, stone cold demeanor that Dalton had for his two Bond films, especially for License to Kill, which is my favorite James Bond movie of all time, and which shows which is a testament to my worship on Timothy Dalton. So that's what got me thinking, what if they were to reboot Casino Royale in 1987 as opposed to The Living Daylights? The Living Daylights was good, but then it was still lacking in something. It felt that the script was kind of weak. It felt to me that at the time, Cubby Broccoli did want to reboot Bond in a sense because they wanted to step away from the lighthearted jet-setting playboy image of Roger Moore, and but then it still felt like the the overall fan base didn't want to let go of the wisecracking, over the top Bond that Moore had, so they still kind of retained that for Dalton, and which I felt that The Living Daylights was a cool movie but not great. So I put my imagination on overdrive, and I made the pre-make for Casino Royale 1987 with Timothy Dalton. And another thing that kind of raised my juices on this pre-make was I saw a hypothetical fan trailer of Casino Royale 87 with Timothy Dalton. It was extremely well done, very well edited, and they had a lot of whoever made this video spliced a lot of Dalton's Bond films along with I think it was either Die Hard or something else, because they had interesting casting choices to play for Le Chiffre and all that. And it was a cool trailer, like a fan trailer. However, I didn't agree with the casting. So I wanted to take this opportunity to do the Casino Royale pre-make with Timothy Dalton and enhanced casting choices to improve on that fan trailer that I saw on YouTube.
See, I'm in the zeitgeist of, I think everyone is aware of the story, but maybe they're not, that Pierce Brosnan was originally supposed to be Bond before Timothy Dalton was, but they would not let him out of his Remington Steele contract. It's very similar to what happened with Tom Selleck and Indiana Jones. Like, if Indiana Jones could have been Tom Selleck if they were able to get him out of his Magnum PI contract. So Brosnan was on the short list for the longest time. I have a question. Did you ever see those screen tests for Sam Neill as James Bond from like 83, 84?
I have, yes. So wasn't that for he was screen testing for, was it Octopussy?
Yes.
I think he could have been good too. Oh yeah.
I thought he did a great job as well, but I think, like you said, there was people that were not ready to let go of the Roger Moore era. I honestly think that people were really excited because my mom's told me this story that in that era of the 80s, she was excited to see Pierce Brosnan as James Bond because it was in the trade magazines. It was in all of the scandal sheets and stuff like that, that we were not going to get him as James Bond because of Remington Steele. Therefore, I think that Dalton, who is still kind of unknown, at least in the States, right? He'd done a lot of BBC stuff. He was still kind of unknown as a face. So I almost feel that he got a bad start in the role because there was an anticipation of what we could have had if he had, Brosnan had been James Bond. I feel whoever the next James Bond is going to be in this modern times, they might face the same kind of scrutiny because there's a lot of people who aren't ready to let go of Daniel Craig yet. And with all these crazy casting choices that are out there, I feel like there's a big opportunity of disappointment because people are so attached to what James Bond is for this particular era, the 2006 till now. So yeah, so I think Dalton got a bad rap. I think he got a better rap than Lazenby did, for sure. Lazenby only got that one shot. But I agree with you. I think Dalton brought a detachment of personality to Bond that I think the character needed for the 80s. Because he was almost turned into a cartoon by Roger Moore in the 70s, right? We needed to make him a little bit dangerous again. And Living Daylights does that pretty well. He still has a charm. But dude, License to Kill is the Bond movie where he is like, okay, I'm turning off the charm now. And this is all about revenge and getting the mission completed. It's that energy that he brought to it that I think a lot of people undervalued 100%. And it's the same energy that Daniel Craig brings to not only Casino Royale, but Quantum of Solace too. Like, Quantum of Solace may as well be License to Kill, in my opinion, the energy that he channels from Dalton. So yeah, I agree with you. So this would be a lot of fun. Okay. So let's go ahead and jump into this because we got a lot of names. We got a lot of people. So if we were to make Casino Royale in 1987, let's start with directors. We're going to do this round robin style. So since you are my distinguished guest, I want to know who you chose as the director for Casino Royale 1987.
Well, I decided to play it safe, and I picked the same director of The Living Daylights, which was John Glenn, because he does a spectacular job in the cinematography of the film, the sweeping image of Europe and the Middle East and that. So I decided that let's give John Glenn the chance to reboot his directorial efforts in Casino Royale instead of The Living Daylights, because I thought he did a really masterful job as a director of The Living Daylights, and I thought, yeah, let's see how well he would do with the Casino Royale reboot.
I did like the fact that John Glenn was kind of like an everyman journeyman for the James Bond series. Like, he was one of those directors that could direct anything, comedy, action, whatever. And giving him a James Bond movie, a whole slew of them, it made sense because it kept the style, the theme, and the overall presentation of the film very in sync with each other, right? It didn't feel too goofy. I mean, Moonraker's a goofy script. You do what you can, right?
Right.
For me, John Glenn, though, he directed one of my favorite films of the 1970s, and that's Oliver Reed in Sitting Target. Remember that movie with Ian McKellen? Not Ian McKellen, Ian McShane, young, sexy Ian McShane. And
never seen it, but dying to, though. I hear it's so good.
Oh, dude, it's such a good movie. It's got one of the best prison escape scenes, too. And that is like, when I go back to that journeyman stuff, like I talk about Richard Donner all the time about that, or Friedkin, right? Like they give them a comedy, a horror, an action, whatever, they could do it. You don't see a lot of that anymore. And John Glenn's another perfect example of that, where he could essentially direct anything you give him. Big budget, small budget, he's going to make it a good movie. And I think that is a skill lost in a lot of modern directors because everyone wants to be an auteur. Everyone wants to have their own like facade of what their style is. And then directors back then, it's like, I don't care if people don't think it's a John Glenn movie, just make a good movie, right? Like that's what you're hiring me for. I always thought he was perfect in that. Okay, so my pick, I kind of went very similar to you. I picked another British director who's mostly known for making American films. I picked John Badham, director of War Games, Blue Thunder, and Short Circuit. Again, another journeyman director who can do kind of everything. You know, War Games is like a techno drama, right? Blue Thunder is an action-based film with lots of technology and great flair. And then Short Circuit has got a lot of comic timing, a lot of fun, silly moments, but also has like that techno, almost military feel to it. I thought that he would do a great job with a James Bond film because James Bond movies essentially have all three of those genres in them. They've got the techno, they've got the action, and they've got the comedy. So that's who I picked to direct this pre-make of Casino Royale.
That works extremely well because even with the somewhat primitive looking 80s technology that they had in The Living Daylights, Badham could have certainly had breathed digital life into Casino Royale. And Casino Royale, at least the 2006 version, was super high tech. And I don't know exactly how they would have done like some of the the airport scenes in Miami International where Bond was trying to track the terrorists and he's using the cell phones and all that. I don't know how they would have done that exactly in '87 since texting didn't exist. It wouldn't exist for another almost 30 years later. But I like that choice though. That's and with in the hands of Badham, he probably would have figured out as to how they would make it technologically believable for an era where it was still like the Cold War. It was still everything was still analog, but he could have made it work. Good call.
Yeah, I looking at his resume, I'm like, how did this guy not direct a James Bond movie?
Yeah.
You know, sometimes people just don't get their opportunity, but we're giving him one in retrospect.
Right.
Okay, so as for a screenwriter, and that's one of the things is like a lot of the James Bond films, especially in that era, they had the same James Bond factory, right? They had the same writers and directors, set builders, whatever. They all shot in the same studios. That's why they do feel very similar in many ways. But I feel like once we get into the 80s, we're getting a lot more experimental in who we're bringing on to write. So for a screenwriter, who would you see as a good one to make the Casino Royale story come alive?
Two names come to mind: Lawrence Kasdan and Philip Kaufman. They do a great job. They did a great job with Raiders of the Lost Ark, and they really fleshed out Indiana Jones, which is sort of a for not a forefather, but like it's cut in the same cloth as James Bond, obviously. So
Agreed.
I thought Kasdan, especially like he was so good with coming up with making Indiana Jones human. I would hire him to make James Bond more human because Casino Royale showed a depth to Bond that has not been seen ever in all of the previous Bond films. The previous incantations of 007 made him look superhero-ish or larger than life, but not enough about his weaknesses, about what made Bond tick, why he liked to drink vodka martinis all the time. And I thought that particular screenwriter, Lawrence Kasdan, and also Philip Kaufman, would be excellent to come up with a more human James Bond.
I love that choice, and my choice is right in line with that, honestly. But yeah, that's great because I agree with you. The Roger Moore James Bonds, and even to some extent the Sean Connery ones, it's the idea of like, he'll always get in trouble, but he'll never really get hurt. He'll never really get broken. He'll always get out of it. It's very similar to the idea of like how both The Rock and Vin Diesel have in their contracts that they can't get hurt, right? They can't lose. They always have to come out on top. It's the same thing. My writer, I picked Robert Towne, which falls like literally right in line with your two. I know that he ended up doing the first two Mission Impossible movies, which I thought is a perfect example of what he could do with a techno thriller. If we're turning, 1987 James Bond into more of a techno thriller character, Robert Towne is like the perfect guy to it. It'd be a little bit darker, but I feel that's what Casino Royale needs, right? Where I do agree with you, Kaufman and Kasdan are great at doing like emotional characters that audiences cheer for. I'm not sure if I wanted my James Bond to be a cheered for character yet. That would come later. At first, we have to be emotionally attached to him and care about what's going on. And I think Robert Towne is really good at that. The way he gets us to essentially attach ourselves to Jake Geddes, right? Who's not that great of a guy, but we are invested in his journey. And that's kind of how I saw this first addition into the James Bond franchise with Timothy Dalton. Because I feel that Dalton would be able to do his dialogue really well too, right? That's another thing. Dalton was really good at delivering dialogue, very good at coming off as a believable spy and soldier, not just this charming, smarmy, aristocratic spy.
That was one of my issues with his performance in The Living Daylights, because it felt like Dalton was a slave to that still kind of devil-may-care super spy that Moore had. And I love that intro to The Living Daylights, because it was very exciting. It was probably it's one of the best cold openings for a Bond film, except that right at the very end of it, they kind of return back to the cheesy Bond, like where like he parachutes into the hot lady's boat,
Yeah.
and then the lady gives him a drink, and then Bond's like, I'll be there in an hour, and then that's the classic James Bond staple, but it still made him fall into that rabbit hole of the more fun kind of vibe. And as you mentioned, that Dalton was more of not just a super spy, but like that pure MI6 kind of agent, a soldier, as you say. And if with either of our respective screenwriters were to tackle Casino Royale back in '87, I hope they would completely do away with how Dalton was drawn in The Living Daylights and give it that Casino Royale 2006 edge.
Yeah,
I
the
think.
edge for sure. Okay, so villain, Le Chiffre. Who did you pick for this one? Because this one's exciting for me.
Oh, this I had to think long and hard for Le Chiffre, because he's my second favorite Bond villain of all time, right after eye patch guy from Thunderball. His name escapes me, but like, even though he's my favorite Bond villain, Largo. Excuse me, that was him. Anyway, Le Chiffre is portrayed by Jürgen Prochnow. He is one of the very best Euro actors ever. And if I may go back to that fan trailer that I saw on YouTube, very interesting casting, but I don't agree with it. That uploader had Alan Rickman as Le Chiffre. Interesting actor, but it's a choice for that role. But he, God rest his soul, Alan Rickman was not very menacing. He was not very intimidating. So I don't agree with his choice of Rickman as Le Chiffre. Perknell, on the other hand, was very dark. He was very scary. And I could totally picture him crossing swords with Timothy Dalton, especially in that notorious torture scene.
Mm-hmm.
You imagine like Dalton is stripped down to his birthday suit, and then Prochnow is looming over him, and then doing the smacking of Bond's balls with a knotted rope. And then I could readily picture Dalton laughing while he's screaming, and his Bond is saying, "They're gonna get you. You're gonna die." And I could hear Prochnow growl, "You are so wrong." I could hear him do that. My God, like Jürgen Prochnow is amazing, and I'm surprised he was never a Bond villain. He would have been absolutely the very best Le Chiffre if they had picked him.
Oh, absolutely. He definitely would have been a great Bond villain. They've put him as villains in other movies that were like Bond adjacent, you could say. I even think he's really good in Judge Dredd 95. You know, he's not the main villain. You got Armand Assante, again, another guy who should have been a Bond villain, but that's not who I picked. For Mila Sheaf, I picked Terrence Stamp. I love Terrence Stamp, especially when he chews the scenery, because very much like Malcolm McDowell, he only has two modes. It's either underplayed or overplayed, and I'm a fan of both. And I think that the casino baccarat playing suaveness of the guy would work in those scenes, and then when it's time for him to be the menacing villain, right, he would really pull it off. I'm just a huge. I just want to see Terrence Stamp in like every movie. I want him to be the villain in every movie, and so that was an easy one for me. But dude, Jürgen Prochnow, that's a good pull. I kind of wish I would have seen that.
I actually considered Terrence Stamp because I saw Superman 3 the other day, and I saw him as General Zod, and then he is the quintessential over-the-top villain who was never over-the-top actor who was never a Bond villain.
Right.
And the way he screamed "kneel before Zod" sort of reminded me of Mads Mikkelsen's screaming in that torture scene in Casino Royale. I could easily hear Stamp go, "You are so wrong." Also, good choice on that too, dude.
Yeah, I mean, and there's so many. That was like the hardest one for me at first because I was like, there's so many guys I wanted to see, but at the end of the day, I went with Terrence Stamp because like he should have been a Bond villain. My personal opinion, dude. I do like the film Tomorrow Never Dies. Is that the one I'm thinking of? Yeah, Tomorrow Never Dies with Jonathan Pryce as the villain, right? I like Jonathan Pryce, but I didn't think he made a good Bond villain. I would have rather seen Terrence Stamp in that role, and that would have brought a little bit more edge to the movie because there's so much good action and there's so much good energy in that film. I think that is my favorite of the Brosnan era. I'm a huge GoldenEye fan, but Tomorrow Never Dies I think is underrated, and I think a lot of it has to do with how kind of weak Jonathan Pryce is as a villain. Terrence Stamp would have brought that menace to it.
Wow, like him as that media mogul tycoon. Yeah, I could see that. Like,
right? Essentially, he played that character in Wall Street, right? Just bring that energy.
Right. True. And I haven't seen Tomorrow Never Dies in a long time, so I should revisit it. It is underrated as
Michelle Yeoh, man, like that was like the movie that kind of like brought her to the stateside, you know, after the success of Crouching Tiger. Like, you know, I first saw her in like all of the Hong Kong movies and especially Super Cop, but yeah, like bringing that to it. Okay. This is going to be a fun one. I'm really curious to hear who your choice was for Vesper Lynd, the Bond girl of the film, who steals Bond's heart.
This was a little tricky because I was trying to figure out like which European actress who's not overdone and who's kind of French looking at. I struggle with this one. I originally thought of Charlotte Lewis from The Golden Child. Have you ever seen that? Surprisingly, was never a Bond lady herself, a Bond girl. But actually, I did cast her in this premake, but not in the role of Vesper Lynd. I decided on Isabelle Adjani from Possession as Vesper Lynd because she's also French, just like Eva Green. She looks like Eva Green. And I've never seen Possession, but I've seen the trailer for it. It looks amazing. So that's going to be that's on the top of my must-watch list. So I picked her as Vesper Lynd because she has that vulnerability and also kind of an aloofness about her, like a very cynical aloofness about her that would probably match Eva Green's portrayal of Vesper Lynd so well.
Dude, we're on the same page. That's who I picked too.
No shit. Oh, yeah, wow.
I couldn't think of anyone better for that era. And so if this came out in 1987, it would have been out in the same year as Ishtar. And she's in Ishtar, and essentially she plays kind of like a Bond girl. She is like a French, Israeli, not even Israeli, Middle Eastern guerrilla warfare soldier. Like she is behind the scenes, she's seducing guys, but also she's like this freedom fighter. So it shows that she does have those kind of action chops and acting chops. So if she had this out the same year as Ishtar, it would have helped untarnish her Ishtar reputation because it essentially like really tarnished everyone in that production of 1987. I'm an Ishtar fan and a defender, but critics hate it. A lot of people hated it, but she is so good in that movie. And her eyes, man, like she says a lot about herself and her performances through her eyes. She does it in Possession. And then half of Ishtar, she's behind like a mask. You just see her bright, beautiful eyes, just like Eva Green. So I think it would be a perfect match. I'm so glad that we got on the same page as that one. I almost went with Paulina Portskova from Her Alibi with Tom Selleck, because I think she has a lot of that energy too, but she's too aggressive, and I feel she needs more softness. Vesper needs a little bit more softness, even though she is aggressive, and Ajani, I think, fits that perfectly.
And a note to your listeners, we did not discuss any of this beforehand.
Nope. I told us not to. Yeah, 100%. This was going to be all surprises.
Yeah, it was certainly it was just a coincidence that you and I had picked Isabella Ajani, and that's so far our combined match here of our casting choices.
So far, great choices on everything, and I was wondering if that was going to be the one that was going to have some crossover, and if it did, great. It means we're on the same page.
Right.
Next is, I think, a very forgotten and underrated Bond character through many of his films, played by many different actors. And in the 2006 version, Jeffrey Wright.
Felix Leiter.
Yeah, I like Jeffrey Wright. I like that I feel like he's like Tom Hardy, right? He never wants to speak like a person. He always has to speak like a character. And there's nothing wrong with that. And his Felix Leiter, I think, is very good. I like what he does with it, especially compared to how Felix has been portrayed in the past, where he's been everything from, because he's the CIA guy, he's the American, and they've always put him as like a real kind of Yankee guy or like a real kind of Wall Street yuppie guy. He always has a different vibe to him, which I think is part of fun of the character. So who did you put as Felix in this one?
I wanted to make him a person of color too, just like how they did with Casino Royale with Jeffrey Wright. And you're definitely correct. Wright was a very terrific and complex Felix Leiter.
Mm-hmm.
There had not been any, actually no portrayals of Felix Leiter since David Hedison in License to Kill. That poor guy got his leg chopped off by a shark. So this is like probably the most complex version of Felix Leiter in the Bond franchise. I wanted to pick, like as I said, a person of color. I thought about resurrecting Bertie Casey from
Never Say Never.
Never Say Never Again.
Yeah.
Who was pretty good in that, but then I didn't want to always recycle too much. I wanted to pick somebody different. Just before you and I were speaking, I had on Running Scared from 1986 on my TV, Gregory Hines as Felix Leiter.
Oh, I like that a lot.
Yeah, because like he was mainly a dramatic actor who had comedic chops at the same time, and I thought if they were to have Casino Royale in '87, I feel that they would have picked Hines as Felix because he was already on he was just off the Cotton Club, and he did Running Scared, and they showed that he was pretty intense, at least with Running Scared. So I thought he might make a pretty good black Felix Leiter. And I feel that he would trade barbs with Dalton quite well, especially in those casino scenes where Leiter was trying to encourage Bond to go back to the poker game. Bond was ready to kill him, but then Hines as Leiter would say, "No, hold on, man. I'll fill you with a little bit more. I'll put up a little bit more of our funds for you to keep going on the poker game." And I could see Gregory Hines giving that kind of banter to Dalton as a kind of a American partner, not psychic, but CIA partner to our beloved MI6 agent here.
I like that a lot. Gregory Hines, very surprising performer, especially in the 80s, because he did comedy with History of the World. He could do espionage like he did with White Knights with Mikhail Baryshnikov again. And then did you ever see that movie Eve of Destruction?
Yes, it's a sci-fi movie, right?
Where he's essentially like a Blade Runner. He's out there hunting androids, So they put him through the paces in the 80s, and I feel sometimes that's what keeps you from getting like the superstardom, is if they just keep putting you in different kinds of roles, then you don't get to find the role that's really meant for you. So do what you do best. Be a very good, strong, supportive character, and I like that a lot. I didn't pick a person of color. Main simple reason is I like Jeffrey Wright. I feel he really got to bring that big moment to the Bond franchise because not a lot of people saw Never Say Never Again. It's kind of like the bastard child of the Bond franchise, right?
Right.
That's a whole other
But
episode. So I was
and
thinking
I
of,
like that one too.
yeah, me too. I was thinking of like, okay, so who had like charm and personality, but also kind of had a little bit of like an asshole-ish patois to his speech. I went with 1987's John Larroquette, Dan Fielding from Night Court as Felix
Wow.
Leiter. Because I feel like he could probably come off as a smarmy CIA agent. We've seen him do stuff like that before. We've seen him play the asshole drill sergeant in Stripes. But at the same time, he wears a suit very well. I think that he could have blended in and brought some color and charm to the role. So that's who I went with. Because again, John Larroquette is another actor that just never really found great success on the big screen. Great TV actor, had a lot of work in that industry, but always was kind of like a side character or a pop-up character in his two films, which were Madhouse with Kirstie Alley and the movie with Bronson Pinchot.
Well, very out of left field choice, but I like it. And I love him in Night Court. He's easily the best character in that show. So him as Felix Leiter, wow, that's making me think.
Because I feel like part of the fun of that role, especially with these movies that are British, is that like us American assholes, right? So it's like
Yes.
the CIA asshole over here, and I felt that he really channels that energy quite well, at least for that time. Because by the time Jeffrey Wright was playing it in 2006, it was more of like, we're done with the satire of these American jerks, right?
Mhm.
We're more like having the same goal, the same focus, and that's why it worked so well. But he was always kind of like they overcompensated it with Joe Don Baker in the Pierce Brosnan films, where he didn't play Felix, but he was essentially the Felix of those movies, the country boy CIA guy, right?
Right, right. Or like the redneck spook that they had play for him. Yeah, he
Right.
was pretty much like an overweight good old boy type of Felix Leiter. And which makes me wonder, like, why did they have Felix in the Brosnan movies? Was it a kind of like a copyright thing, like what they had with Blofeld? I never figured that out.
I never figured it out either. Maybe they were like trying to, I don't know, reformat the brand. You know, like, oh, maybe we don't need. I mean, he did get his leg bit off, so maybe they were like, he wouldn't be in action anyway.
Right. But then again, like they never really cared for continuity up until Craig's contribution.
Agreed.
Yeah, like it felt like the producers assumed that audiences wouldn't pay attention to minor stuff like that, so they just kept recycling, they kept reformatting until 2006 came along. So at least they brought Felix back, which I was pretty happy for.
Right, and like we didn't get a decent Q either for a while, right? in the Daniel Craig years, there's no Q in this movie, at least in the 2006 version. So I didn't even cast a Q. Did you? Yeah, me either. I was like, it's not in there, so I didn't do it.
It wasn't necessary, I didn't think, because I wanted to keep the vermicitude of 2006 Casino Royale to this, and since they didn't have Q, it's like, screw it. I'm not going to put him on here. At least we'll probably say that for a later episode if we were to do the remake of Skyfall, which they
Right.
bring Q back there. But for the time being, yeah, well, I'm going to decide to keep the image alive of 2006 Casino Royale in '87.
Now, surprising carryover from the Brosnan days is Judi Dench as M, right? Which she had a 3-film run essentially with the Daniel Craig films. And yeah, that might be one of like the few carryovers besides Q, when he was carried over from the Sean Connery, Roger Moore, Dalton, and Brosnan phase. You know, I think they wanted to kind of carry on the idea like there has to be some kind of character carryover, and that's why they went with Judi Dench with M. So who would you have cast as M if we weren't doing carryover into this new era of Bond?
This was probably the toughest one for me because I was trying to see keeping again with the vermicitude of '06. I was trying to find like a lady, like a British lady who could play female M, and I couldn't think of anybody good except for maybe Colleen Dewhurst. If you know who she is.
Of course.
She was a very good Golda Meir in that movie, Sword of Gideon. I thought about her. But then if I also wanted to keep the carryover, just give it to Robert Brown as M. I mean, like he was a good boisterous, like bossy police captain type, but as M. I decided to just keep him as a part of M, at least for this incantation of the pre-make. But if pressed, if I wanted to give it to an older lady, Colleen Dewhurst.
That's really cool. She, most probably known to the cult film community, was the mother of the killer in Dead Zone.
Right.
And then if you're an 80s baby, she was in the Anne of Avonlea, Anne of Green Gables, Canadian series that was on the Disney Channel, playing so genteel in that. And then to see her play like strong female characters. I think she was also married to George C. Scott for like a handful of years back in like the 70s. Yeah, I might have to double check that, but I think that they were a partnership for the longest time. Anyways, okay, so I went with a complete opposite spectrum. In my mind, I'm thinking whoever is M at this moment in time in 1987 is probably a Cold War holdover, right? From the days of being like an MI6 agent, spy, soldier, assassin. I was trying to think of the all-encompassing tough guy to be this role, because that's what I think the 80s were about, was like, we need to be tough, we need to be macho. Dude, I put Oliver Reed as M.
Nice. Oliver Reed. He's one of those actors that never did a Bond film either. He should have, but at the same time, I wasn't quite sure who could he have played. Did he ever play Russians? Oliver Reed? I'm trying to recall.
Yeah, I mean, I know he's played Russians and Germans. He did this movie in, I think, 90 or 91 called Hired to Kill.
Oh, yeah.
With Brian Thompson, where he is essentially like a dictator, almost like a Gaddafi kind of guy of this island that is holding political prisoners. And he, wears like the dictator soldier suit and stuff like that. And he's super hyper aggressive, but he's also gay.
Oh yeah.
So that, like he brings like this effeminate charm to this angry guy. And I was like, I could kind of see that in an M, where it's like,
yeah,
who knows? Like, I'm not saying there should be any homoeroticism between M and Bond, but Oliver Reed was always good at making already like uncomfortable, creepy characters even that much more uncomfortable and creepy. And there is something about M where it's like, you don't put a normal bureaucrat in that role, which is why, as much as I love Ralph Fiennes, I didn't think Ralph Fiennes was a good M, because he's kind of genteel, right? Judi Dench was like very ball busting because she had to be, right? It was like the feminist role. And everything up before that was like very bureaucratic. I'm like, I would see a guy who was like, let's bomb these sons of bitches. And that's where Oliver Reed comes in,
Nice. Wow. He would have given like a kind of a Churchill kind of feel to
I feel so. Like, think of him with like a cigar and like a martini at all hours of the day.
My God. That blows my Colleen Dewhurst and Robert Brown choice out of the water. That's terrific. And at this point, like, Reed never really had any good movies to speak of in the mid to late 80s, and then he did Hired to Kill, which is crap. And so if he had been picked to play M, this probably would have saved his career considerably up until like Gladiator.
I agree. Well, think about it. Like, I think just a year or two earlier than what this would have been, 1987, he did that terrible Cannon film where he was essentially Jekyll and Hyde. Remember? It was bad, where he was like a doctor who was very, very ugly, and he was trying to create a plastic surgery to make people prettier. And it was just a total bomb. And I was like, oh poor God. Oliver Reed in this movie. This could have been his redemption song, right?
Right. Provided that he wouldn't have blown his paycheck on scotch.
Right.
Oh, man. Or bourbon.
And that's the thing, is like, if he would have done a 3-film run for Bond, if he would have done this, which is our pre-make, and then Living Daylights, and then License to Kill, that's great. Like, do those 3 films and then let Judi Dench come in and take over. In fact, I think that makes even more sense if you had that kind of character where it's like, oh, if he was the predecessor, they'd be like, okay, we need someone who's not as wacko as Oliver Reed. Let's bring in the number crunching mathematics statistician Judi Dench as M. I think it would have been a good carryover.
Like a nice little segue. That's damn right.
Okay, so the last one that I brought to my list was singer slash, you could say composer, but mostly singer for the song. And then you went and did some more casting. We'll let you finish off the episode with those. So
Sure.
it's a little after their main heyday, but I love the voice of Alison Moyet of the band Yazoo.
Mm-hmm.
And I always thought that some of their songs had a very James Bond-esque kind of feel to them. Bring in Vince
Right.
Clarke, who was also part of
Keyboardist.
Depeche Mode and Erasure. Have him do a lot of the synth and keyboard and give it that kind of style to Casino Royale. That's who I picked. And if we wanted to get even a little bit more 80s, you could have had him also kind of be the composer and put like a 80s techno theme to the classic James Bond score. So that's who I picked, Alison Moyet and Vince Clarke, to do the song/score.
Very nice. Would they be singing "You Know My Name" or an entirely different song?
I think they could have done it either or, right? Like I think they could have done their own original song and composition for it. But I also think that they could have done an 80s techno version of that song as well.
Interesting. And I love that band, by the way, Yazoo. What's that song that they did that was featured in Tango and Cash? Man, like it's during the Terry Hatcher dance sequence. I can't think of it, but
Right.
but yeah,
Yeah.
it's
But
an
also
icon,
I
for God's
do
sake.
yeah, and like mostly they're known for the song Only You from the John Hughes movies, right? But like
Right.
I really think that they would have been a good voice of the 80s
Mm-hmm.
to do a James Bond movie. It's
Mm-hmm.
almost like what Garbage did, right? When Manson did her version for The World Is Not
Right.
Enough, right? I feel it'd be like a very comparable kind of thing.
Definitely. And now that you mentioned it, I think Yazoo would have made like since you brought up the more of the '80s new wave kind of edge. It probably would have sounded very similar to Aha's "The Living Daylights," which I love.
Yeah.
That's like my second favorite thing about that movie is their theme song. And I always say like people like '80s fans always say, "Oh, I love Take on Me. It's such a great song," and I'm like, amateur.
Living Daylights,
The
man.
Living Daylights is the best Aha song of all time. But for my choice to sing the theme, In Excess for You Know My Name.
Ooh, that would have been good. 100%. And it fits right in the theme, like, because you had Aha, and then you had Duran Duran for View to a Kill. I think it would have fit right in. It's funny, like we did have like those male vocalist bands in the mid 80s doing the James Bond themes. And then once we kind of got back into the Tina Turner for Goldeneye is when we got back into the sultry female voice. Yeah, it's interesting. Oh yeah, because wasn't it Chris Cornell? It was Chris Cornell, right, that did that, which is fine. I mean, rest in peace. I love that song, but I thought it was an interesting choice after we had so many great female vocalists. Don't get me started on the Madonna song, dude. I hate
Oh,
it.
Die Another Day. Yeah, that remix like late '90s crap that she had on there. Oh
Right.
yeah, easily the worst Bond song. And I think it was also an interesting choice to have Cornell in that too because he was a grunge singer, and this was an entirely different style of music for him to explore.
Mhm.
So I remember back in '06 when they had him singing the theme song. I thought Chris Cornell, this is just as crazy as casting Daniel Craig for the role of Bond. But I kept an open mind and I heard the song and I'm like, wow, this is actually very kick-ass. This is in keeping with this resurrecting Bond kind of approach that they're doing. And going into this pre-make, I was trying to figure out which singer in the late '80s kind of had like that scraggly, tough voice that could possibly sing this. And I thought Michael Hutchinson, yeah, like another singer that we've lost, unfortunately, to very tragic means. So God rest his soul as well. It was either In Excess or Talk Talk for the sing the theme to Casino Royale '87 because kind of like what you thought with Yazoo, if we were to use a more of an '80s new wave traditional like new romantic kind of deal, I thought Talk Talk would have been a pretty interesting choice.
I love Talk Talk. Also, I kind of like almost went rogue and like maybe Billy Idol could have done a James Bond movie,
Okay.
just kind of like spruce it up a little bit. But then I went way too wacky with it. I'm like, no, stick to your original one.
Yeah.
All right.
Hey, Billy Idol is pretty damn good too.
Right. So those were all the main ones that you and I did, but you took the extra step and cast a bunch of the side characters. So let's go ahead and give you the floor for a minute, and you can discuss those, and then we can say who played them in the 2006 version. So who do you got?
Absolutely. Mr. White, the that member of Quantum, who is essentially the Chief's boss,
Right.
and spoiler alert, kills the Chief in Casino Royale. I picked David Warner for that role. Another actor who never appeared on a Bond film. He should have. I thought he would have been a pretty good parallel to Jesper Christensen, who was very good in his performances as Mr. White in all of his Bond appearances up until Spectre. And I thought, wow, David Warner is the right after Christopher Lee is that ultimate sinister British actor, and I thought he would be pretty good as the guy who was pulling Lashif's strings, the guy that Lashif was terrified and just scared shitless to deal with, and was his ultimate demise. And I thought, David Warner, why
That's
not?
a good one. Yeah. Again, surprised he's not in a Bond film. Plenty of Star Trek, though.
Yeah. And also the original voice of Ra's al Ghul in Batman the Animated Series. I believe the very first actor to portray him in that character.
All right. Who else you got?
Let's see. Rene Mathis, the turncoat French agent. I have Herbert Lom for that role. Another actor who never appeared on a Bond film but should have. I have Charlotte Lewis, who I originally thought for Vesper Lynn, but decided to recast her for Valenka, who was Le Chiffre's girlfriend.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always loved Charlotte Lewis because, she is still beautiful, but back in the 80s, she was gorgeous and had like a dark feel for her. And I think she would have been pretty good as a Bond girl. Stephen Obano, he was the head of the Lord's Resistance Army, that African terrorism group, played by George Harris. Do you know who that is, Antonio?
Remind me.
He was Captain Katanga in Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that guy. It's like I've been using like a good amount of Indiana Jones crossovers on here.
Yeah.
He was also in Black Hawk Down. He was very good in that. Like a small role, but like a very intimidating role as a Somali warlord. He was in that. Who else I have on my list? Dryden, if you remember that character from the cold opening to Casino Royale. I have Jos Ackland as that character. If you remember him from Lethal Weapon 2, like the South African drug lord diplomatic immunity, that guy. Him
Bill
as
and Ted's
Dryden.
Bogus Journey.
That dude too. Yeah, my God. The quintessential like almost Donald Pleasance like kind of character actor.
Yeah.
And I had to. This one was a tricky one for me too because I love that chase sequence in Casino Royale like, where Bond is chasing that parkour running assassin.
Yeah.
Yeah, that guy.
And they never did it again in any of the films.
Which just boggles my mind, right? Like, why don't they? Parkour is still a pretty hot trend, if I'm not mistaken. So surprisingly enough, they never tackled that again at least in the Craig series. I have stunt expert Clive Curtis to play for the role of Molotov, the parkour guy. Clive Curtis was in For Your Eyes Only. He was one of the assassins trying to kill Bond in Spain, and most famously, he was the big thug in Batman. 1989 Batman, who was beating up Batman in the church, the big black guy with the glasses. Mm-hmm. That's him for Molotov. And as a holdover from the original series, but was not in the 06 Casino Royale, I wanted to put Walter Gotell in as General Gogol because this is the 80s, the Cold War still going on. Of course, the KGB would be involved somehow.
Right.
Gotell returns for his final appearance as General Gogol.
I did like the fact that like Robbie Coltrane kind of played the Russian character in the Brosnan movies. He had an early demise, but that's one of the things where I think sometimes the Brosnan movies, they really hit it right on the head, especially like the first three. And then I don't know what happened with the last ones, man, where like they just went way off course. They stopped bringing in fun characters, and I feel like they were just trying to keep up with like the music video energy that was so prevalent in movies of that time, especially with the music and stuff like that. And the problem is that Brosnan was getting long in the tooth too. It just didn't match, you know? You got like this hyperkinetic energy and this music video flair, and you got the older dude. You know, he's still suave, he's still charming, but it didn't fit. I mean, once they had him essentially surfing down the ice, no. That was kind of it for me. So I'm glad that they cut it off there. But yeah, I love your casting ideas. And the things about these conversations, right? Because we have these conversations all the time, not necessarily on a podcast, is like that what if, right? Like, what if we got a film like this? What if they really had done that? And the part that really burns my hide the most is the fact that when you go back and you see that a lot of movies were in development hell for decades, and who they had originally casted or directing or writing these things that just sat as treatments for years before they finally got it. I still have my Entertainment Weekly from, I want to say 98 or 99, that talks about Michael Mann doing the film Collateral with Al Pacino and Robert De Niro in the leads. That's who it was originally written for. And it was in like the real news segment of my Entertainment Weekly. And then 7-8 years after that, we got it with Tom Cruise and with Jamie Foxx. But originally it was supposed to be in New York, a New York cabbie, and it was supposed to be Pacino and De Niro. That's who it was arranged for. And then we get the version that we actually got. So when you go back and you look into these development hells and all these different unmade movies, it fits in the same realm as what we're discussing about these pre-make movies, like what could have happened. If you really want to see some cool stuff, go back and look at the original casting ideas for the Watchmen movie had Terry Gilliam had a chance to make it. That's where they had like Jamie Lee Curtis in the film. They would have had Robin Williams as Rorschach. They had all these different ideas that were only on paper from the filmmakers, but never made it to the next step. And I feel like episodes like this and conversations like this are essentially that. We were essentially creating our dream cast for a development hell project.
It's actually kind of painful to think about too. You know, it's all these what ifs, and they only rest in our minds as to what they would have looked like. And at the same time, though, if these what ifs were to happen, would they be reflective of what we imagined, or would they come off as stagnant or with studio interference? It wouldn't match at all.
I have a theory about that. I have a theory about that where I think that the Star Wars prequels up in 2005 and then like the birth of the MCU kind of ruined movies, right? And the Harry Potters too. Because up until then, films like this, the thing about Bond movies in the 70s and 80s is that they were moderately budgeted, right? Like, so you had to deal with a lot of creative process to show a lot of action and suspense, but you did it through editing. You did it through, for example, you build the biggest set in the world at the time for You Only Live Twice, right? The underground bunker. And they did it at Pinewood Studios, right? But how much of the movie was actually set there? Not a lot, right? Or the submarine facility in Octopussy, right? Not a lot of the film is set there, but they went big. So if you're going to have a big set piece like that, you have to be conservative with all of your budget and all of your filming everywhere else. You have to really rely on story. You have to rely on performance and editing and direction and skill. And then once we got into this era of CG, they stopped caring about character development. They stopped caring about story. They stopped caring about performance. And they were like, throw more special effects at it, throw more money at it, throw more garbage at it. And they still are doing that. I mean, look at the latest Russo brothers film on Netflix right now with Millie Bobby Brown and Chris Pratt. $300 million for a Netflix movie, and it's garbage, right? Like, we haven't broken the cycle on that yet. So I think that's where movies like the James Bond films came into play, because you were going to get a great action movie with humor and charm and characters, but you weren't going to be this big budgeted. If you fail, it's going to essentially ruin your intellectual property if you fail, right? The thing about having these mid-budget Bond movies is like, if one sucks, we'll just try again next time because we didn't blow every single dollar we had and essentially kill the property. That's always been my theory about why James Bond has such an everlasting place in our lexicon, is because they never went too big on it.
Mm-hmm. Less is more, isn't it, Antonio?
I agree 100%. Look at the
Oh,
movies
yeah.
we talk about on our podcast, man. They were all less is more movies.
Yeah. Would you say that it's not necessarily the studio's fault that's they're forcing to put more money and more CGI? I blame the audiences. I blame not just Gen Zers. I blame also people older than them. I blame our fellow millennials. I blame the boomers because everybody is obsessed with their phones. Everybody wants something instantaneous. Nobody wants to sit and absorb anymore. Therefore, the studios are pandering to the audience's lack of an attention span, and they're assuming that they're just going to stick around and just observe a spectacle, but not care about story and character development. And I think that's the reason. Like I could sit and watch a movie. I could sit and watch The Exterminating Angel over and over again, as well as a deep James Bond film, hypothetically 87 Casino Royale. But I really don't know what kind of solution I could offer to that, except for studios to stop pandering and take a chance at forcing people to just sit and absorb. You know?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot to debate there, because at the same time it's like, uh, who's the person more guilty and responsible, the drug dealer or the person that got addicted to the drugs that the dealer was giving? It's kind of the same thing. It's like, I think the studios got audiences excited for this whole thing, and then audiences kept wanting more of that at the time because they were hooked on it. And so the studio just kept making it bigger, bigger, and at the same time, I'm not going to say cheaper, but they didn't put the money where it should have been. Like, that's one of the things that I've been so bugged about too. When you look at special effects from like 2010 to 2015, the CGI is pretty damn good. And then we've been hearing about how much worse it's gotten because they're making more movies and thinning their budgets on them, so they have to make sacrifices in quality of CGI. Instead of paying one good, let's say, Industrial Light and Magic to do all your special effects, now they're like chopping all of the segments up, sending them to cheaper production houses to make their final production, and none of the effects match, right? Because you have different people doing it, because you essentially franchised out your special effects to all these different production houses, instead of saying, hey, let's make a really great looking film with the best company out there. Again, that's where like I have to argue is that it is a business, and the studios, they don't care about content or quality as much as they care about return. And so they're going to be thinking about it that way, which is why studios like Neon and A24 and a lot of these Chinese invested films are doing so much better when it comes to the Oscars, are doing so much better when it comes to, like, I'm not going to say box office return, but loyalty of the viewer, right? A24 and Neon have a cult now of people that are just so into these films because it's the return of this low to mid budget story and character driven thing. And people are kind of walking away from the big budget bullshit, which is great. Sometimes you have to break a system like that. The same way people are breaking
Right.
Target and Walmart right now and Tesla by not spending money there. That's what we got to do. And eventually the studio will catch up.
Hopefully, because A24 and Neon, they've got a good thing going, and in order for the business to survive, they should be on top. Like everybody should put all their attention and their firepower to what they've got going in order for this business to survive. That's why I'm hoping and praying that there'd be a new renaissance, like how they had in the early '70s, where they had
New
like the
Hollywood.
exactly, like with Scorsese, they got Spielberg coming up. Even though I love Steven Spielberg, but then and Lucas, but then I sort of blame them for the studios becoming obsessed with commerce again.
It
Whether
is. It's
they
true.
yeah, when they made Jaws and Star Wars. You know, I mean, like I great movies, I enjoy them, but then that spelled the death knell of story and character once again. And I don't want to blame them, but then I'm sort of pointing like a passive aggressive finger to those guys. It's like it's sort of your fault, you know.
Yeah. I don't think that's what they intended, but eventually that's what becomes. Like every great innovation eventually leads to the destruction of an art form. It's true. It can't, with painting, with print, and with film, innovation only has like a certain half-life before it starts becoming its own destruction of its art form. And yeah, and we're living through it. That's the thing, is our generation, we're living through it. We were alive during the blockbuster era in the 80s coming into play, the big budget CG of the 90s, the intellectual property wave of the 2000s and 2010s, and now we're seeing what I think is, like you said, it's the death rattle of the industry, because it's just become this self-consuming analogy of itself. So yeah.
Going back on James Bond, Antonio, would you say that Casino Royale 2006 was the last great James Bond film, and without having to suffer from the demands of the studio interference of CG? Because I have to say, it's been a while since I've seen it, but Quantum of Solace kind of made Bond conform to later on of the demands of CGI.
Yeah.
I hated that damn chase scene in Quantum of Solace where it looked fake,
Yeah.
as opposed to Casino Royale, where they're literally running through the cables, running through walls, elevator shafts. They don't have that in the later Bond films.
No.
And that's why I feel that Craig suffered his final Bond similar to the fate of the other of his predecessors before him, that their last Bond films are terrible. And No Time to Die was okay, but I was underwhelmed, you know. And then like it didn't feel like a Bond film to me.
No Time to Die had to make up for what a disappointment Spectre was, because Spectre was terrible.
Mm-hmm.
And then Skyfall was maybe a little bit too good to be sandwiched between Quantum of Solace and Spectre. But also, my opinion with Skyfall is Skyfall would not have been as good if it didn't have Javier Bardem, and if it didn't have Albert Finney and like all these great characters that show up, right? Like that's kind of what made the movie for me. Like if you have anyone else but Bardem playing that character, it's not that great of a film. And I think that's one of the things that suffered with it for sure. I don't know. I'm worried about Amazon owning Bond now, but at the same time, it might be what Bond needs. Because if there's one thing about Amazon, at least up until now, is they don't necessarily have a super hands-on approach to the creativity. They just hand money to people and the people make the product. And sometimes it's really good and sometimes it's not. So if this is the reinvention of Bond, and Amazon's just handing them a purse and saying, make the best thing that you can make with this, whether it's a series, whether it's another stream of movies, I really don't know. But this is the golden opportunity to make Bond interesting again. I think a lot of it has to do with the casting, and I think a lot of it has to do with who they're putting in charge of running the thing, you know? So it's a blessing and a curse. I'm a big critic of what Amazon's doing ethically, morally, financially. But at the same time, they don't put their hands in it as much as other services and studios do. So that could be the saving grace of this whole situation.
Could be, because I see Amazon here as basically a way more expensive Golden Globus kind of thing. Like they're basically $1 billion canon. They're just saying, here, like we'll give you X amount of money, just make it good. And like they're, as long as they keep it hands off, great. You know. And I hope that they won't do that, the creative cop out of gender switching Bond or color washing Bond. I don't care for that, honestly, because I think it's a cop out, plain and simple. It's like they're just too creatively lazy to come up with something good. And I love Idris Elba. Like I adore the man, but I don't think he should be Bond. Bond is traditionally white.
Mm-hmm.
As far as also like making James Bond, or excuse me, 007 a woman, that's not so bad because it's just a code name. So I think that's what they were trying to think of doing, was that they're making 007 a woman, not James Bond 007, which I think is okay. Like if they're keeping with the canon of No Time to Die, spoiler alert, Bond dies at the end of that if nobody knows. and I can't remember the name of that actress who was like the colleague of Bond in No Time to Die, but she did a pretty good job in that. If they're gonna give her the new 007 status, that's okay. And if Amazon were to do that, good luck. Let's see how that goes out. Or if they're gonna reboot the film all over again, we'll see. I mean, I think it's a reboot at this point is kind of over and done. Like it might be a little too overcomplicated at this point, but we'll see how they do it.
And it's an interesting conversation. Like this is something that could be going on forever because everything is so emotional and driven by culture and sociological sciences these days, where it's like maybe James Bond just needs to kind of not exist anymore until he's ready because he is a relic of the Cold War. He is a relic of espionage of the 50s and 60s. I think that the misogyny and the sexual politics of James Bond has been up and down over the decades where they're course correcting and then they go hard in the paint and they course correct again. Maybe they should just give it a break of James Bond and just focus on the 00. Just focus on the MI6. It's kind of like what they're doing with Ballerina, right? Like it exists in the same world as John Wick and the Continental exists and they're doing their own things with that, but they're not necessarily focusing on John Wick. Who says they can't do something like that? And then when the world is ready again for a James Bond character, then they can just bring it back. But at least don't let the universe die. And I think that's the most important thing. I feel Star Wars has kind of gotten that right in the idea of like keep Star Wars alive through these episodes and series and comic books, but we don't have to focus on Skywalker anymore, right? Like Skywalker's done. Leave it alone. Let it die. Let it rest and bring something else back. Maybe Bond and MI6 is the same kind of story where it's like keep the world alive. And when the world is ready for James Bond to return, he can come back,
That's a good idea. Yeah. Well, one suggestion I would give to Amazon, this will make the hardcore Bond fans happy. What about sort of a spin-off prequel series based on General Gogol? I love that character because he was so deep right. And he was very complex. And like bring that character back, obviously have a new younger actor play him. Have it be a period piece set in like the 60s and 70s, and of course like Bond will come back in some form or another, but like the adventures of a pragmatic KGB agent who is trying to protect this country as opposed to taking over the world. That's why I love General Gogol. Like I would totally watch that show or read like a spin-off book series of it.
Bro, look how big the Penguin was, right?
Yeah.
Do a Blofeld origin story, right?
Like
do a villain expose of the Blofeld history, of the family, of Spectre itself, right? People love a good villain story these days. The Penguin is the proof of that, and it keeps the world alive, and it gives you like the insight from another side. And you don't have to empathize with it. Like that's the best part about the Penguin is like, oh, you feel for it, and they're like, oh no, he's just a terrible guy. Well, that would be the same thing, So yeah, we could do this all day. It's great. So I love the fact that we pre-made this movie. I love all of our choices. Of all of your casting decisions, which one is your favorite that you brought to the table?
Definitely Lashif. I always feel like Jurgen Prochnow never had his flowers as an actor. Like action fans will definitely remember him as the sinister bad guy from Beverly Hills Cop 2. He was in Dust Boot, but he never found his due as an international superstar. In this hypothetical proper alternate universe, he would have been the ultimate Bond villain. And him dueling with Timothy Dalton, chef's kiss. It should have happened.
I love that one too. I think at the end of the day, my favorite one is the director, John Badham. I just love him as a filmmaker, and I think that he could have done so much with a James Bond film, especially this one. So that's the one that I really, at the end of the day, I looked at my list and like, oh, that's the one I wish I would have seen. And then Oliver Reed as M was a close second.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah, that's awesome. Like I never would have thought of that. That would have been the thinking out of the box decision for N at least. Like Oliver Reed as M. Kudos to you, man.
Yeah. Thank you for that. All right, brother. So this comes out a few weeks from our recording. So what have you got coming out in the Rad Revival House that we should be excited for?
Well, as of this recording, this upcoming week will be my discussion on The Last Boy Scout. with my special guest lecturer Rob from Trace Cinemigos, another really cool podcast on underrated cinema. And the Rad Revival
Yep,
House
I've had him on my show.
Oh yeah, oh that's right. Yeah, I forgot about that. Um, and season 2 is winding down, and it should be wrapping up by end of spring. And as I said, I have my new podcast video coming up in the summer. Still hush hush at the moment, but I believe I told you like well the basic concept of it, right, Antonio?
Yes, you did.
Yeah. So
And I'll be a guest on that one for
uh,
sure. You've already invited me, and I can't wait.
damn right. Yes, you got to be on there. Like, I need sharp minds to get the ball rolling, especially this one. Let me put it this way: it's reviewing a very specific country, and it should be high up there in international cinema as far as the ranks are concerned. It's not, sadly, but it should.
It should
And
be.
that's
Agreed.
what that podcast is going to be. So that's the next plan.
Awesome. I will take this opportunity too, since you're talking about upcoming plans, where I have just kind of broken my 200th episode. Yeah. And I've started kind of scaling back on the Cult Worthy. I've gone like every other week on releases because I'm planning something new as well. I feel like in this day and age, especially with all the things going on in the world, not just the United States, I feel like people need some escapism, right? And the last 4 years of doing the Cult Worthy and then my other podcasts that I've been doing off and on, I feel like I am educating people on film, right? Which is one of the things that we were hoping to do with our podcast. But then I also think that there's a lot of healing qualities to cinema. I feel like just like listening to a good song makes you come out of a bad mood. You know, there's breakup songs, there's exercise songs, there's get it done songs. I feel movies the same way. So I'm in the current state of developing a new show, which I have called There's a Movie for That. And we're already starting production, we're starting the art, we're starting getting everything together. And what it is me and a special guest every week are going to be diagnosing someone's emotional state, whether it's sadness, happiness, a breakup, a childbirth, a passing of a loved one. And we're going to diagnose a movie for their particular emotional stance. So it's, hey, you went through some heartbreak, there's a movie for that. Hey, you got promoted and you're scared about all these new responsibilities, there's a movie for that. And so we plan to have the first episodes of that sometime in early summer, probably June, July, but hopefully you'll be a guest on that show. But I will be scaling back Cult Worthy a little bit to every other week to fit in this new show because I'm so into cinema podcasting and I'm ready to take that next step of like having real emotional conversations about cinema and more than, hey, have you seen this movie? It's really cool, right?
Well, I'll be happy to. Wow, that's a great concept. I dig it.
I appreciate that. So yeah, so you'll see that sometime this spring, summer. Until then, keep tuning into the Cult Worthy, keep tuning into Back to the Balcony, and please go subscribe, like, rate, review, and follow my friend Caesar at Rad Revival House. If you're a cinema fan, it's just a great show. And it's like a college course. It's like a presentation, and I love the way you do it.
Thanks. Think of it as the best type of film class that you've had in college or maybe even high school that you never had. Something that's more fun and will take you away from the doldrums of life. A lot like your upcoming new concept podcast, Antonio. That sounds awesome. Count me in.
Awesome. Appreciate that. So everyone, thank you. Please like, rate, review, subscribe to the Cult Worthy as well. 5 stars. Tell your friends. Share it on social media. And Caesar, it's been a pleasure. I'll talk to you later.
Thank you. Catch you later.